I walked through the front door of my own house at 6:47 on the Thursday evening to find my husband's younger brother sitting in my reading chair, his feet on my coffee table, a half-eaten bowl of my cereal on the cushion beside him, watching something loud on my television. There were shoes in my entryway that weren't mine. 3 pairs. A duffel bag slouched against the wall near the staircase. My husband came out of the kitchen holding a dish towel. He had the look I had come to recognize over 2 years of marriage. The one where he's already arranged his face into something apologetic, but hasn't decided yet how apologetic to let it get. "Hey," he said, "you're home early." I was not home early. I was home at 6:47, which was the time I was always home. I had been home at approximately 6:47 every Thursday for the 2 years we had lived here. "Hey," I said back. I put my bag down. I took off my coat. I looked at the shoes. I counted the pairs again. 3. What happened over the next 6 weeks would unravel most of what I thought I understood about my marriage, about the house we shared, and about the particular kind of slow invisibility that settles over a woman who has been accommodating things that were never hers to accommodate. What I found on the other side of those 6 weeks was something I hadn't let myself want in a long time. The simple, almost embarrassing fact of my own life lived on my own terms, in my own space, with my own cereal in a bowl where I put it. But let me start where it actually started, not with the shoes in the entryway, but with the woman I had been for the 18 months before that Thursday. My name is Avery. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed clinical social worker at a family services nonprofit in the city, a job that requires me to spend my days managing other people's crises with a calm I have to actively construct and then actively set down when I leave. I bought a small craftsman house in a quiet neighborhood 3 years ago before I met my husband, before any of this. I bought it alone with my own down payment, saved over 6 years of deliberate, unglamorous discipline. The mortgage was mine. The deed was mine. The house was mine in the complete, unambiguous way that something is yours when you have chosen every detail of it yourself. The porch color, the kitchen tile, the particular second-hand rug in the living room that took me 4 months to find. I met my husband at a work conference 2.5 years before the Thursday with the shoes. He was warm in the way of someone who grew up surrounded by people and had never had to learn how to fill silence. He was funny without trying to be. He was considerate in the early months in ways that made me trust him. Showing up when he said he would, calling when he said he would, paying attention to small things I mentioned in passing. We dated for 8 months before I suggested he move in with me, since his lease was ending and my house was larger, and I had thought at the time, with the specific confidence of someone who believes she knows what she's doing, that I had found someone worth the risk of proximity. We married 14 months after that. Small wedding, his parents' backyard in September. Late afternoon light. He had a large family and I had known this going in. An older sister, a younger brother. Parents who lived 40 minutes away and treated every weekend as an open invitation. Cousins. Childhood friends who had been elevated to the status of family through years of proximity. Aunts who called the landline, we did not have a landline, and then called his cell when no one answered. They were warm people, genuinely. They brought food when they visited, and they laughed easily, and they welcomed me in the way of a family that has always been too large to be precious about its edges. What I hadn't understood, what I came to understand, the way you come to understand that a headache has been building, not at the moment it arrives, but in retrospect, recognizing the early signs you had dismissed, was that warmth and awareness of other people's space were not, for this family, the same thing. The warmth was real. The awareness was simply absent, not malicious, not deliberate, just absent, the way someone can be kind and still take up all the air in a room without noticing. The first time my brother-in-law came to stay for a long weekend, my husband told me 2 days before. That felt reasonable. The second time, he mentioned it that morning. I said that felt a little short and he agreed and said he'd give me more notice next time. The third time, I came home to find the guest room already occupied. He'd told his brother yes before he'd told me anything. I said something about it that evening, calmly, specifically. He said he was sorry that his brother had needed a place and he hadn't thought about the timing. I said I understood but asked that we talk before plans were made, not after. He agreed. The agreement lasted 11 days. I want to be exact about what the pattern looked like over the following months, because the tendency when describing accumulated frustration is to sound like someone cataloging small grievances and expecting them to add up to something larger than they are. So I'll be specific. My mother-in-law rearranged the refrigerator while helping with the family dinner because, she said, it made more logical sense her way. She said this with affection, as though she were doing me a favor. I spent a week reaching for things in the wrong places. When I mentioned it to my husband, he said she was just trying to help, and could I be a little easy about it? I tried to be easy about it. I moved everything back and said nothing more. His younger brother, the one in the reading chair that Thursday, had a habit of arriving with no notice and staying between 2 days and a week, depending on what he had going on. He was 24, between jobs more often than not, and my husband was the person he called when things were uncertain, which was frequently. I had nothing against him personally. He was not unkind. He simply treated my house like somewhere that was available, which is a different thing from treating it like somewhere he was welcome. His sister came once with her 2 kids and let them eat in the living room despite my one quiet request that food stay in the kitchen because, she said, they were watching something and it would just be easier. When I found a ring of orange juice on the wooden side table I had refinished myself, I cleaned it without saying anything, because by that point I had learned that saying something produced an apology from my husband and no change in anything else. I raised it with him after each instance. Each time, he said he would talk to them. Each time, something in the way he said it told me that his version of talking to them was softer and more qualified than the conversation I was actually asking for. And each time, within a few weeks, the same thing would recur. Slightly more entrenched, the way patterns do when they are never actually addressed. I told myself this was what it meant to marry into a close family. I told myself the discomfort was mine to manage. I told myself that love was large and required flexibility and that I was perhaps less accustomed to communal living than I should be, being an only child, being someone who had built a life that was specifically, deliberately quiet. None of that was true, but I believed it long enough to let the house I had saved for and chosen and furnished with care become a place I had to brace myself before entering. And then came the Thursday with the shoes. I had had the kind of day that doesn't end so much as it runs out, back-to-back sessions, a family in crisis that required 2 hours of calls after my last appointment, a supervisor check-in that went late because a colleague was struggling and I was the person she called. I left the office at 6:15 and drove home and pulled into my own driveway and sat in the car for 2 minutes breathing before I went inside. The duffel bag against the wall was my brother-in-law's. The other 2 pairs of shoes I found out later belonged to 2 of his friends from college who were passing through town and needed somewhere to stay for a few nights. My husband was in the kitchen. He had started dinner, which was something, and he had the dish towel and the slightly too casual energy of a man who is hoping his initiative in one area might offset a deficit in another. I should have texted, he said. How long? I said. Just the weekend. They'll be gone by Sunday. I looked at the duffel bag. I looked at the shoes. I counted again. 3 strangers in my house. 2 of them people I had never met, installed without a conversation, without a question, and the only acknowledgement of any of it was I should have texted. Okay, I said. I went upstairs. I changed out of my work clothes. I sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet of the room, which was the only room in the house that was currently uninhabited by someone I hadn't invited, and I stayed there for a while. Downstairs I could hear the television. I could hear my brother-in-law's laugh, which was loud in the way of people who have never had to modulate themselves for other people's spaces. I could hear voices I didn't recognize. I had worked a 10-hour day. I had used every available tool I had, professional, interpersonal, emotional, managing other people's pain, other people's emergencies, other people's children. I had nothing left. Not for strangers, not for a performance of welcome I had not signed up to give. I got back up, went to the bathroom, washed my face, changed into the clothes I wore when I wanted to feel like myself. I got the novel from my nightstand. I got back into bed and I read for 2 hours while downstairs dinner was made and eaten and cleaned up without me. My husband came up around 9. You okay? He said. I'm fine, I said. I turned a page. Are you going to come down? I looked at him over the book. No. He sat on the end of the bed. He had the expression I had learned to read exactly over 2 years, the one where he's about to say something that sounds like concern, but is actually a request for me to make things easier for him. They're just here for the weekend, he said. I know, I said. When did you find out they were coming? He was quiet for a moment. This afternoon. So you knew for several hours and didn't say anything until I walked through the door. I didn't want to worry you at work. I would have preferred to be worried at work. I said, to coming home and finding 3 people I didn't invite in my house after the day I had. He looked at the floor. I went back to my book. You didn't even say hello to them, he said. I wasn't up for it tonight. They're going to think I don't have a lot of room to care what they think of me tonight, I said. I'm tired. I'm going to read. You're welcome to stay if you want to. He didn't stay, if you want to. He didn't stay. He went back downstairs and I listened to the sounds of my house, my floors, my walls, my ceiling, holding people I hadn't chosen for the evening. This was not the moment things broke open. I want to be clear about that. That night was a line, the first one I drew without immediately softening or apologizing for it. But it was not yet the ending. The ending took longer and had more steps and was, in the final version, much quieter than I expected it to be. The guests left Sunday afternoon. My husband and I circled each other for 2 days with the polite tension of people who have said true things and aren't ready to say the next ones yet. He was not unkind, neither was I, but the absence of a conversation was its own kind of pressure. I was the one who brought it to the table, literally. I made coffee on Tuesday evening and set 2 mugs down and sat and said we needed to talk, actually talk, about the pattern. He sat. He listened. I said what I had been building up to for months, in the calm, specific way of someone trained to have hard conversations professionally. I said I loved his family, and I valued our relationships with them, and I needed our home. My home, the one I had purchased and maintained and was responsible for, to be a place I could rely on. I said I was not asking him to cut anyone off or to be different with the people he loved. I was asking to be consulted, to be treated as a partner in decisions made about my own house, to have the basic respect of a conversation before plans were made, not after. He nodded. He reached across the table. He said he understood and that he would do better and that I was right that it had gotten out of hand. I wanted to believe him. That is the honest version. I chose to believe him in the deliberate way of someone who understands it might not be warranted and does it anyway because the alternative is a grief they're not ready for. His brother was back 6 weeks later. Not for a long weekend this time. My husband told me on a Wednesday evening that his brother was having a hard time. He'd lost his job. The apartment situation had fallen through. It was temporary, just until he got back on his feet. I said, "How long is temporary?" My husband said he thought maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks. I said, "Did you tell him yes before we had this conversation?" A pause. Long enough to be an answer. "I wanted to make sure it was okay first," he said. "But you already said yes." He looked at the table. "I told him I'd talk to you. I thought about the 6 months of conversations behind us, the apologies, the agreements. The same patterns presenting themselves reliably every few weeks, unchanged by anything we'd said. "When does he move in?" I said. "Friday," he said. I nodded. I said I needed a few days to think, and I went for a walk, and I walked longer than I meant to. And when I came back, the house was quiet, and I stood in my own kitchen and looked at the tile I had chosen, and the rug I had found, and the shelf I had built with a YouTube tutorial and 2 trips to the hardware store, and I thought, very clearly, I am done. Not in the explosive way, in the quiet way. The way of something that has finished. I called my best friend that night. She is the kind of friend who answers on the second ring when she recognizes something different in a call, and she answered on the second ring. I told her the full version, not the version I'd been softening for politeness. She said, "Come stay with me whenever you need to." She said it like it was already decided. I didn't leave that night. What I did instead was something I had been trained to do in my professional life and had not thought to apply to my personal one. I started documenting the dates of each unannounced visit, the conversations we'd had about it and what had been said, the specific things, the refrigerator rearranged, the table with the orange juice ring, the weekend with the strangers whose shoes I had counted in my own entryway. I wrote it down in a notebook I kept in my work bag, in the same plain, factual language I used in case files. I also called my father. He was a retired contractor, methodical in the way of people who have spent decades reading blueprints and understanding what holds structures up. I told him the full picture. He listened and then said, "The house is in your name. Not a question." "Yes," I said. "Mortgage too." "Yes. We split the utilities and groceries, but the deed and mortgage are mine." "Okay," he said, quietly. The way he says things when he wants them to land precisely. "Keep that in mind." I kept it in mind. His brother moved in on Friday. He was not unfriendly. He was not trying to cause trouble. He was 24 and a little lost, and he loved my husband the way younger siblings love the person who has always been the one they call. I understood all of that. I did not hold any of it against him personally. What I held against my husband was the fact that he had known, somewhere in the honest part of himself, that I would say no if asked directly. And so he had structured the situation so that by the time I was asked, the answer had already been given. That took me several days to articulate clearly, even to myself. When I did, I wrote it down. The first 2 weeks of his brother living with us had the quality of a ceasefire. My husband was attentive. He cooked dinner more often. He checked in about small things. I was pleasant and present, and I did not apologize for the conversation we'd had before the brother arrived, which was new and which I could feel him registering. On a Saturday evening in the 3rd week, I came home from a full day of catching up on notes at the office to find that my brother-in-law had had 3 friends over. They were in the living room with takeout containers and beer cans and a streaming service I did not subscribe to queued up on my television. My husband was with them. He looked up when I came in and said, "Hey, we're just watching a game." I said hi. I went upstairs. I sat at the desk in the bedroom for a long time, looking at nothing. And then I opened my laptop and looked up family law attorneys in the city. I called one on Monday. Her name was not on the list of names I wanted to avoid. She had a quiet office downtown, sparse and well lit, and a manner that was efficient without being cold. I brought my documents, the deed, the mortgage papers, the financial records I had kept since the beginning, the notebook. She looked through the materials without rushing. Then she looked at me. "You've been careful," she said. "I've been worried for a while," I said. I didn't know what I was worried about yet. She explained my situation with the directness of someone who respects your time. The house was mine. The financial entanglement was limited to shared expense accounts with modest balances. There were no joint debts beyond the utility bills. The picture was, in legal terms, clear. "Are you certain this is what you want?" she asked. I thought about the shoes in the entryway, the refrigerator rearranged without asking, the table with the ring I had cleaned, in silence. 6 months of conversations that produced agreement and no change. My husband's voice saying I thought maybe a month when the answer had already been given. "I've been certain for a while," I said. I wanted to make sure it was the situation I thought it was and not just a bad few weeks. She nodded. We talked about what came next. I did not tell my husband that night or the next. I spent a week sitting with the decision the way I sat with hard decisions at work. Not second-guessing, just making sure the ground under me was solid. It was. I called my father. I called my best friend. I wrote 3 more pages in the notebook, not documenting the situation anymore, but thinking through it, trying to identify the thing I would say to my husband that was true and complete and not unkind. I found it on a Thursday night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking at the tile I had chosen. I told him on a Friday. He came home at 6:30, and I was at the kitchen table, and the stove was cold, and I had a folder in front of me. He looked at the folder. He sat down. I told him what I decided. I told him I'd spend months trying to have a conversation that would produce a different outcome, and that the conversation had produced the same outcome each time, and that I had come to understand that this wasn't a failure of communication. We had communicated. He had heard me and he had agreed, and he had, each time, made a decision that prioritized his family's ease over my right to a say in my own home. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a choice, a repeated one. I said I wasn't angry. I said I didn't want to hurt him. I said the house was mine and had always been mine, and I was asking him to move out. He was still for a long moment. "Is this really what you want?" he said. Not a question. More like he was checking the solidity of something he already felt giving way beneath him. "Yes," I said, "because of my family." I thought about how to answer that and then answered it honestly. "Because of us," I said. "Your family is where we became visible. The problem isn't any one of them. The problem is that I told you what I needed and you consistently made a different choice. I can't build a life inside of that." He said, "I didn't think it was that serious." I said, "I know. That's part of what I'm telling you." He pushed back from the table and went to the bedroom. I heard the wardrobe open. I heard the sounds of someone packing with the efficiency of shock. No deliberation, just movement, just getting out. He left that night. He went to his parents. He texted me from the driveway. "I'm sorry I didn't do better." I sat with the text for a minute and then wrote back, "Me too," because it was true, because it wasn't an accusation. Because I had wanted the version of him that was possible in a different version of us, and I would probably always wanted a little. The weeks after were strange in the specific way of something returning to its natural shape. I woke up on Saturday mornings without calculating who might be in the house. I made coffee and drank it standing at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, which needed work, which I was going to do at my own pace. I went to work and came home, and the house was what I had left it. Nobody had rearranged the refrigerator. Nobody's shoes were in the entryway. The rug was where I had put it. The relief arrived before the sadness, which surprised me. Then the sadness arrived, and I let it, because I had genuinely loved him, and love doesn't dissolve cleanly just because the situation around it has become unworkable. I missed specific things. The way he made coffee on weekends, the easy company of someone who knew how to be in a room with me. I did not miss bracing myself at the door. I did not miss the math of whose turn it was to need something from me. His mother called twice in the first week. I answered the second time. She was hurt in the particular way of someone who has always moved through the world with the assumption of welcome and has encountered, perhaps for the first time, its limit. I was kind to her. I said that what had happened between her son and me was between her son and me. I said I hoped she understood that nothing I felt was about her personally. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I think we should have been more considerate." It cost her something to say that. I heard it in her voice. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." We haven't spoken since. Some distances open for good reasons and close slowly, if they close at all. The legal resolution took 7 weeks. My attorney had estimated 6 to 8, so we landed in the middle. He was not difficult about it. He had no legal claim to the house, and he knew it. And I think somewhere in him he recognized that contesting anything would have required him to argue against a year of his own choices, and that he was not prepared to do that. We signed the paperwork on a Wednesday morning. We were in the same room for 40 minutes and then we weren't. My father came the first weekend of April. He drove 2 hours, arrived on time, texted me from the driveway to say he was outside. He had never once let himself into my house without being invited. In 29 years of being my father, it had never occurred to him to do it differently. I opened the door and he looked at me the way he always does when he hasn't seen me in a while, just checking, making sure the person in front of him matches the person on the phone. And then he said, "You look good," and came inside. We spent the afternoon fixing things. The porch step that had been soft for months. The bathroom faucet that had been dripping since December. He worked methodically and without commentary, and I handed him things and we talked about my job and his garden and the book he was reading, and it was the most peaceful day I had spent in my own house in more than a year. At dinner, he looked around at the kitchen and said, "Feels like yours again." "It's been mine," I said. "You know what I mean," he said. I did. "It's been 5 months?" Long enough that the shape of the days feels normal now, not provisional. Long enough that I've stopped waiting to recalibrate to someone else's presence. I am not without loss. I want to say that plainly because the version of this story that has no grief is not the true version. I lost a marriage I had believed in. I lost a future I had pictured. I lost the specific version of my husband that had existed in our first year, when things were easy and the trust was whole. I mourn those things at odd, inconvenient moments. In grocery stores, in the car, on Sunday afternoons when the light in the living room is amber and quiet and I am, for the first time in my adult life, entirely alone in a house I love. But what I don't mourn is the counting of shoes. I don't mourn the refrigerator rearranged. I don't mourn the cereal bowl on the cushion of my reading chair. I don't mourn the smile I learned to produce automatically when I came through my own door. The one that costs nothing and means nothing, the one I have not worn once since the last time I needed it. I went for a run this morning. The neighborhood was quiet, the way it gets in early spring, before the heat settles in. I ran my usual loop past the coffee shop on the corner and the elementary school with the painted mural and the block where someone always has wind chimes that sound like a different key depending on which direction the wind is coming from. I ran back up my street and stood on the porch for a minute, catching my breath, looking at the door. The door has my name on the deed. I went inside. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, the one I'm going to fix up this summer, slowly, at my own pace, the way I do things when I have the time and the space to do them right. Nobody was coming over today that I hadn't invited. The house was exactly what I had left it. That's where I leave this. Not with a lesson, not with a verdict on anyone, just with that, a Tuesday morning, a quiet house, a cup of coffee going warm in my hands, and the clean, ordinary feeling of being exactly where I am supposed to be. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. It's the question that follows a decision like mine, the way a shadow follows a person, quietly, always at the same angle. And the honest answer is that I wouldn't have done much differently. Not because I handled everything perfectly, but because I think I had to go through each step in the order it came before I could understand what I was actually looking at. What happened to me didn't happen all at once. It happened the way erosion happens. Slowly, incrementally, each small concession, feeling reasonable on its own. Until one day you look down and the ground you were standing on is just gone. My husband wasn't a cruel person. His brother wasn't a bad person. Nobody in that situation was trying to cause harm, and I think that's the part that took me the longest to untangle. The absence of malicious intent does not mean the absence of harm. What is taken carelessly still costs the person it's taken from. What I understand now, in a way I couldn't articulate when I was living inside it, is that every relationship, every good one anyway, requires a certain kind of honesty that is harder than affection. Affection is easy. My husband was full of affection. What he wasn't able to do was look at the effect of his choices on me and hold himself accountable for it. That's a different thing. That's the thing that takes real moral seriousness. The willingness to ask not just, did I mean well, but did I actually do well? And to sit with the answer even when it's uncomfortable. I spent months softening the way I said hard things because I thought making them easier to hear would make them easier to accept. What I learned is that softening just made them easier to dismiss. There's a kind of clarity that only comes from being direct, not harsh, not punishing, just precise. When I finally said what I needed without hedging, without pre-apologizing for the inconvenience of having needs at all, the situation became legible in a way it hadn't been before. I could see it clearly, so could he. And what we saw told us everything. The documentation I kept, the dates, the conversations, the specific details wasn't bitterness. It was evidence-based thinking applied to my own life. It was the choice to stay clear-headed when the easier thing would have been to let feelings make the decisions. I had been trained to think that way professionally, and it took me longer than it should have to understand rigor and self-advocacy weren't things I had to leave at the office. Intelligence isn't only useful in a workplace. It belongs in the private decisions too, the ones about what you will accept and what you will not, and what you are willing to do about the difference. And then there was the part that required something I can only describe as steadiness. Not anger, not drama. Just the willingness to stay committed to a decision that was correct even when it was hard, even when I missed him, even when the house felt too quiet. That kind of follow-through, the kind that doesn't require an audience or a resolution that comes quickly, is what I'm most grateful I found in myself. It was there the whole time. I just hadn't needed it at that particular weight before. The door still has my name on it. I still have the rug and the tile and the porch I'm going to repaint this summer. I have my mornings and my evenings and my reading chair with no one's bowl on the cushion. I have the right to know who will be in my house when I come home to it. Those are not small things. I used to think they were,